Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you for another week. We're a day late from when I usually do this podcast. I had to do father duties, and my youngest son is in his last year of elementary, so I got to go on a field trip. So it's been a while since I've done a field trip. Those are always entertaining, to say the least. Uh, but we're back. You know, you gotta be the dad, right? Like you gotta do that. You can't just always work, especially in the off season. So we're back though, and we got a lot to talk about today. So today we're going to do a quick roster update from the Red Rocks. Look at some of the early football betting odds in the Big 12 and where Utah lands. We'll do a post-spring rankings. We'll do it tiered, and then conclude with some post-spring defensive position breakdowns. So we'll kind of jump into that fun. So before we do that, let me tell you about our partners at Canyon View Credit Union. Whoa, sorry, messed up something right there. So, feeling confident about your finances changes everything. And that's where Canyon View Credit Union comes in. They focus on helping you build something strong over time at your pace and in a way that fits your life. With Canyon View Credit Union, it's not about one size fits all solutions. It's about steady progress, real guidance, and having someone in your corner who's there for the long run. Through every step, every goal, every new chapter, Canyon View Credit Union is right there with you. And honestly, that kind of support just feels different. Learn more about how Canyon View Credit Union can help you build your own momentum at canyonviewcu.com. Canyon View Credit Union, shaping your financial journey. All right, let's jump into this. We got a lot to talk about today. So we're gonna just before we jump into it, let me kind of tease some upcoming podcasts. So this year we'll break down today the defensive positions. Next week we'll do the offense. So we'll look at some of that kind of stuff. We'll also kind of do a preview of um, official visit season and who's going to be on campus this year for Utah. The end of May is when players will start officially visiting Utah, and this becomes a big recruiting period for Utah. And I'm really curious to see how Morgan Scally manages this and kind of what happens there. And so we'll get into that. And then in a couple weeks, we're going to start our schedule breakdown. So if you remember from the last 2 years, every offseason, what I do is I take two teams on Utah's schedule and we break it down. So we go a little deeper into who they are post spring, all the transfers that they have, kind of what challenges were presented, that kind of stuff, to kind of do a big schedule breakdown to kind of get an idea of who Utah faces this year. So each week we'll take two teams. We'll break those down and go into it, as well as any other stuff that's going on during that week. But we'll really start heading into the schedule breakdowns as we gear ourselves up to Big 12 Media Days. We'll be at the first-ish week of July, and so we'll get into that, and then we really get into football season. So really looking forward to that. And then throughout this time, we're going to sprinkle in some interviews with various people. I've got a few that are being lined up. It's just a matter of settling it all and getting it all done. So we're going to get a lot of interviews done. It may not be football. It may be gymnastics. It may be basketball, maybe all that kind of stuff. And we're going to kind of get into that. So we'll take care of that. And as always, if I don't have it, my coworker Steve Bartle will have it there. He's going pretty heavy on football this off season. He's going to have a ton of interviews, and really looking forward to what he's doing over there, as we both kind of try to hit you from different angles, but give you the all of the stuff from Utah football, as well as all the rest of the Utah athletics. So really looking forward to all of that kind of stuff. So now let's officially jump into what's going on, and that is Red Rocks roster update. So yesterday, Utah picked up a commitment from a transfer portal entry, and this is Lily Tubbs. She competed at Washington for the last 4 years. She had an off or not an off year. She had a year where she didn't compete, so she has another year of eligibility, a redshirt season. And so this is an opportunity for Utah to be able to bring in a veteran gymnast who is going to be a great asset for the team, being able to help kind of what they need. So this is a good opportunity to have somebody, like I said, that has experience, that can come in and acclimate to the team, has a lot of potential. So she comes in, like I said, this will be her senior year. She'll only be here for 1 year, but she has the potential to compete on three different events, which is vault, excuse me, bars and beam. Bars is her specialty, where she probably could make the rotation for Utah, though we know that the bars routine for or the bars team for Utah is pretty stacked. But her career high is a 995 on bars, and she's hit that a couple times. And so there's a lot to like about what she can do. She can mix in on vault, she can mix in on beam, though those scores have been a little lower. 9875 is her career highs. So there's potential there, but at the very least, you bring in another veteran president presence, if not just for the team alone. Now, this team is much more. It's not even much more, because it's pretty evenly stacked, similar to how last year is. But I think you're seeing a lot more of the gymnasts that you expect to compete, being more upperclassmen. And so you've got Ella Zerbez, Avery Johnson, Zoe Johnson. A lot of these gymnasts who are in there are going to be more upperclassmen, and so they've had that experience. So this is just another opportunity for Utah to be able to have an opportunity to be experienced and do what they need to move forward, with that. So that's the biggest update there. We're not going to spend too much time on that, but a cool opportunity for Utah to be able to bring another player or a gymnast into the roster. This puts Utah at 15 gymnasts out of the possible 20 that they can get to. But this is about the number where you're going to see that you don't want to get too much more than that, 15, 16, because there's just not a lot of spots to be able to go around. So good addition for Utah, and that's a good opportunity for what they're able to do moving forward as they try to advance past regionals like this last year. Last week, I wrote an article, or was it this week? My time is running earlier this week. Excuse me. I wrote an article about kind of what their outlook is and kind of the response to how everything kind of changed for the team. So, cool opportunity, and I think the Red Rocks are on the upswing. So, good opportunity for them to move forward. All right, let's jump to betting odds season. Now, this is the time of the year where, now that the spring season has essentially ended for most programs around the country, schools are out. There's a lot more settled, right? And this year we don't have the spring transfer portal, so it's going to be much easier to kind of settle on a lot of these things, because there's not a lot of movement going on right now. Everything is settled. Rosters have been settled since early in the year in January. You've gone through all of your spring conditionings and everything, and now we've got a good idea of who these players are, including Utah, which we've talked a lot about. And like I said, we're gonna go deeper into the defensive side of the ball here shortly. But you've got a good idea of where things lie. And so this is where, all the sports books out there, this is when they start putting out their odds. And while none of this is gospel, right? None of it is gospel, and everybody's going to have their differences. This is a kind of a good early indication of where people are trying to look at these teams, right? Betting odds aren't a guarantee in terms of who is going to come out on top. Now, obviously, the favorites of a conference are generally going to be at the top. That just makes a lot of logical sense, because you're going to have to spend a lot more money to get value out of that, right? I don't need to sit here and explain betting odds at this point, but the teams that not a lot is expected of are going to be at the bottom. It's as simple as that. And so there's all these betting odds that are going to go out. You're going to see various sports books come out there with their own. So one of them that, and I get these emailed to me quite a bit. It's kind of an interesting part of the job now, where we're in this, and it's something to be part of the regular reporting side of it. Well, at the same time, you have, let's say, Texas Tech with Brandon Sorsby, who is in trouble for gambling. So it's kind of this really weird line that everybody's towing, where you and I, as quote unquote fans, can bet on whatever we want. But if you're an athlete, you can't bet on it. So just there's different lines to this, but at the same time, for you and I, who are looking at this as we're trying to project the season, as we're trying to go into this and look at who the top teams are, or at least the teams with favorable praise, this is kind of the early indication of how we are able to do that. So let's jump into that. Bovada, a known sports book for quite a while has released its odds, and they've done a whole look at the conference and what's going on. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see all these odds right now that I've put on the screen. But we're going to go through this. But we're not going to spend a ton of time on everything here because in a second I'm also going to break down kind of my tiering system of the Big 12. It fits pretty similar to this. But I haven't ranked any of these teams. I'm not going to do that yet. We'll get closer to that as we get closer to Big 12 media days. Curious to see if they bring that back by the way of ranking teams or if they stay away with that. But either way, this is odds provided by Bovada, a standard sports books that many people go to. There's many out there that you can see. FanDuel, I'm sure will have theirs out. If not, I haven't looked honestly. There's a lot of places out there that have these out there, and so it's not a surprise that this is it. So, at the top is obviously Texas Tech. Texas Tech is considered the favorite. They're an even bet. You're going to have to spend a lot of money to make money on them to be the Big 12 championship game winner, and so that's kind of what is to be expected. Now, really curious to see what this roster looks like moving forward with Brendan Sorsby's decision. If you don't know what happened there, you can go back to last week's episode and I document kind of what happened with Brendan Sorsby and all that. But either way, Texas Tech is potentially looking for a quarterback and trying to figure out kind of their situation there and kind of what they can do. And so this changes their odds slightly, but not really. It's quite honestly about the same. Either way, Texas Tech, regardless of quarterback, is going to be near the top. And I think that's pretty self explanatory to most people who pay attention to this sport. So there's that. The biggest shocker that I think came from this, and as somebody that even covers Utah, and look, I'm going to have much more understanding of Utah than anybody out there nationally, just simply because we cover this locally on a day to day basis. It still came as a surprise to me, right? Utah comes in at number 2 with a plus 600. So they have the second best odds in the Big 12, according to Bovada. Whether that's the same in all these other sports books remains to be seen. I think you're going to see them somewhere near the top. But the fact that they're number 2 was pretty surprising to me, especially since the national narrative is about Morgan Scalley and him taking over from Kyle Whittingham, all the changes there, all the different things that are going on and kind of the retooling of what they're able to do. The fact that they have the second best odds shows that there's a lot of belief, at least from a betting side, that Utah has a chance to be able to get to that Big 12 championship game and then win it, right? So they have the second best odds. Now, maybe you think it's crazy that they're not there, right? Maybe you think that they should be at the top of that. I think even the most diehard Utah fans probably think that they should be near the top, but maybe not that high. I don't know. Hard to know exactly what you're thinking. But either way, this is a good indication of kind of the trajectory of where Utah is at. Now, like I said, these aren't guarantees. These are more trying to get people to put money in, right? This is more of the sense of, you look at a team lower on, like let's say Oklahoma State, we'll go just jump to them, plus 4,000. Do you think that they can go win the Big 12 championship? Well, if you do, that's a good opportunity for you to throw some cash down and try to get there. And if you do win, there's some good value there. Whereas as Utah, if you try to throw some cash down on that, you're going to have to put more down to be able to win less, if that makes sense. So, it's trying to draw people in. But at the same time, it's going to mirror, for the most part, what the projections are for the season. Now, in this, Utah is plus 600. BYU is right behind them at plus 650. I would assume that a majority of people out there that follow the Big 12 are going to put BYU above Utah. Texas Tech and BYU were both in the Big 12 title game. This makes a lot of sense based on BYU not really losing a ton, and we'll get to them shortly. But there's a good reason why they would most likely be above Utah. And in this case, they're essentially the same odds. So, yes, Utah has slightly better odds, but it's negligible. You're really, really not getting much value more by picking Utah over BYU or BYU over Utah. Either way, they're about on an equal plane. So, at least based from the conference standpoint, the way that the betting odds are starting to coalesce around this is Texas Tech, BYU, and Utah are your 3 top teams. And you know, we'll see. Like I said, we'll get into a tiered system here of just kind of how I view it. But I think you're going to get pretty similar to that. I think all three of these programs have good schedules that lay up for them. Obviously, BYU and Utah have to play each other, so that's the biggest test. Texas Tech, we went through their schedule last week, and they have a pretty easy schedule, but it's not by any means as difficult as it could be. So, I think those three teams make a lot of sense there. And then just quickly running through this, some of the teams: Arizona plus 1500, Houston and Kansas State at plus 1600, Arizona State at 2500, TCU at 2800, Baylor 3500, Oklahoma State 4000, Kansas 4500, UCF 5000. And then the rest from there, you're getting significant value at Cincinnati, West Virginia, Iowa State, and Colorado. Colorado at plus 20,000. So if you truly believe that Deion Sanders has what it takes, that Colorado can make a big, 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 big change, a lot of value there. Throw some money on that, right? I'm not encouraging you to bet here, but if this is something that you're inclined to do, a lot of value there. But you just have to believe that Colorado's actually going to win the conference, which I'm gonna guess is probably not going to happen. So, either way, like I said, this is a good indication of kind of where teams are stacking up. These odds will change, but for the most part, these early odds are pretty similar to what they're going to be at the time of season start. Things can change, right? Texas Tech all of a sudden lost its quarterback potentially, and that can change things. They're clearly more than their quarterback, but you can see how some of these things can change, and we get some offseason drama all the time. That was a pretty big one for Texas Tech, but there could be some other things coming down the pipe that could change that. But for the most part, like I said, early look. That's all this really is, to be able to get this moving forward. So let's jump into my next side of things, and that is ranking the Big 12 teams. But we're not ranking them 1 through 16. We're going to rank these in a tier. Now, if you're on YouTube, you can already see what my tiering is. For those that are listening to it on the podcast, I'll go through this. So we'll break this down. And like I said, I'm not going to go through each of these teams in a detailed way, right? There's a lot to go into. We're going to go through a lot of this stuff as we go through our schedule breakdown. Utah obviously doesn't play all of these teams, but we'll get into who these teams are and what that means. So if you're a fan of the Big 12, these are going to be important to you because this is who Utah is going to be competing with. Obviously, that makes sense. They're in the same conference, but this is who I believe are in tiers. Now, you can argue with a lot of this, right? Like you could argue that one is more a tier one or tier two. There's a lot of things here. I'm looking at we're assuming it at their best, and maybe not at their best because I think if Oklahoma State's at its best and what people think it is, obviously it could be a tier one because I think they have the potential to be able to get there. Granted, they have a long ways to go, and we'll get to that. But I think if we're talking about at their true best, yeah, I mean, obviously everybody could be a tier one type team if they played at their ultimate best. But I'm saying more of a projection side of like the best of what is expected of these teams. Okay, so that's kind of how I'm looking at this. This is how I viewed it. You can still make some disagreements with this. Clearly, this is not perfect or an exact science. Granted, this is just my projections anyway, so it's my thoughts. So that's what you get. So tier one's not going to come as a surprise to many people. Tier one is I'm going to have Texas Tech, BYU, and Utah. Those are the three teams that I think are at the top of this conference. They were at the top of the conference last year. Texas Tech has probably the easiest path for that, right? Regardless of the Brennan Sorsby situation, they have been infusing a ton of cash into the program, not just to bring NIL, right? Like, I mean, I think that's there, but they're trying to change the entire attitude of their program so that they can be in a situation where they have success. It's using the transfer portal early to then sustain what they're doing through the recruiting class. So this last year and this year, they're ranked pretty high in freshman recruiting. This is something that they're trying to build organically while still infusing it with a ton of talent around the country. So, I think this is probably the appropriate way to do things as a program, and Texas Tech has all the funds to be able to do it. They jumped in early, found the right pieces, found the culture guys that they felt like they could get, and then they're doing that while supplementing that with their freshman class, which is going to just take time, right? You can't expect to hit heavily in your freshman class and expect them immediately to be contributors. They're freshmen. But I think you're going to see this slowly shift over the years where as Texas Tech builds that freshman footprint and as they naturally organically move through the program, this is kind of more the old style, but it's still using the new style of NIL and everything else to be able to bring transfers in and supplement what you're doing. So, really fascinated to see what's going on there. But Texas Tech is loaded all around, right? They did more with less last year at its quarterback position. Baron Morton was not the guy. I think anybody that watched understood that he was just not the guy that was going to get them to the level that they needed to. Now, look, they got to the playoff. They won the Big 12. Like I think that kind of shows like how good they are as a complete roster. And none of that has changed this year. Yes, you lose a lot of studs in the defensive room, but at the same time, you've rebuilt a lot of that. Maybe not to that high level that you got last year, but you're still at a high level to compete. Plus, you've rebuilt your offensive line. You've done a lot of things to make the totality of this team great. So, regardless of quarterback, I think this Texas Tech team is going to be pretty stacked and loaded. Now, granted, if the quarterback situation is just a disaster, we'll see, right? Like you're praying that your quarterback, your starting quarterback that you paid a lot of money for can be eligible, but I just don't see a path where, his gambling situations allow for that. I think Texas Tech understands that and they're going to be preparing for a world without Brendan Sorsby. And so what does that look like? The next option is a quarterback who is coming off an ACL injury. And, here at Utah, you understand how bad that can be for Cam Rising and how tricky that can be. It can work or it can be a real struggle where you don't have what you need. And so it's going to be a real sticky situation for Texas Tech. But at the same time, I think they're still kind of the top tier of this tier. If it wasn't for Brennan Sorsby, I think you could probably tier them as a team on their own. But I think right now with the Brennan Sorsby news, I think you can tier them down with BYU and Utah. Now BYU, they didn't do a ton in the transfer portal, but the ones that they did do, they hit fairly well. They improved, but at the same time, they're losing some key pieces, especially in their wide receiver room. So what does that look like for this team? You obviously lose your defensive coordinator, which is a big loss. But at the same time, I think people believe that Kelly Papinga can be a solid asset there. We just don't know yet. So I think BYU is still going to be at the top of that class. And then you've got Utah, which, I think a lot of people are putting a lot of stock in the Morgan Scalley stuff where, he's not going to be able to have the same consistency that Kyle Whittingham did. And I'm not here to say that that's wrong. I just think that the culture and everything that's taken place and the things that they've done to build will still keep them in this top tier. Now, they absolutely could fall. They could be a tier 3 team, right? They could be a tier 2 team. It's hard to know exactly, and that's but that's why we project these. But I think based on what they have, the foundation that they've built, the guys that they've got coming back, as well as who they've supplemented it with from the transfer portal, this is a team that is still very viable and a formidable force in the Big 12 to be able to potentially win the conference. And so for that reason, I have them at the top with Texas Tech and BYU. Now, there's I would say among those three, Utah has the slimmest margin of error, right? Things could go sideways really quickly because of the newness and the change with everything and an offensive line that is completely brand new. It's not completely brand new. These guys have had some reps, but it's brand new in the sense that none of these guys have played all together outside of in spring, and it's going to be a struggle that way. So this is a high potential for Utah, but at the same time, there is real dangers that it could fall apart if things don't hit the way that they need to. And that happens, right? So I think right now that's where I would tier them. But you could convince me to be a tier 2. I don't think they're any lower than a tier 2. I think they are very much so in contention for a Big 12 title this year, even with Morgan Scalley changing over. Anybody here that knows that, I mean, I know you're fans, and so you're going to have a high praise for your team. But I think just watching how this team has been built and what Morgan Scalley's done, there's a lot of reasons to believe that this should be the case. Moving to tier 2, I've got 4 teams here, and those teams are Arizona, Arizona State, Houston, and Kansas State. Not in particular order. That's just more alphabetical. That's just what I put it in there. So tier 1, I actually put it more of how I would rank it. tier two, and the rest I put alphabetical. So take that for what it's worth. I think Houston and Arizona are probably the top of this tier. I think Houston's done a really good job of being able to build off of last season and supplement it with what they needed to from the transfer portal through recruiting. They're on the rise. Honestly, I think this is a program that is piecing it together and is slowly getting to where they need to be. We'll see if that's good enough this year. But I think Houston, they're a fringe tier one team, high tier two team. Arizona, you obviously have Noah Fafita, who has been really solid, did really well in coming back last year and kind of changing the trajectory of where Arizona was headed. In what was going on with Brent Brennan. There's a lot of love for what Arizona's doing. Can they take it to that next level though? They were doing really well, but can they take it to the next level where you can consider them as a top tier team? I don't know if they're there yet. Now, that's not to say that they couldn't be. Like I said, Arizona and Houston very much so can be tier one teams. I still think that there is a divide there, but at the same time, these teams are more than capable of competing for a Big 12 title. And I think with the razor thin margins of this conference where, teams are going to be more jumbled, where it's like, for example, tier one and tier two are going to probably be pretty similar. You're going to have a lot of teams in that where you could list all seven of those teams in kind of a pool where they're going to compete. Maybe even some of these tier threes. Now, like I said, Texas Tech is probably above most of these, but I think a majority of the conference, especially at the top, is going to be in a jumbled mess. And that's what you saw last year, where one loss can really dictate how you don't get to the Big 12 title game. Utah had two losses, and that kept them out. Now, obviously, two losses compared to teams that had none or one, that's what happens. But I think this is a situation where it's going to be jumbled again. It's going to be really packed. And so these games where they play against each other is going to matter tremendously. Just one game could, right? A win over, let's say, Houston could suddenly flip the tide of the entire conference race, whatever may have you. So really jumbled. Like I said, tier one, tier two are pretty similar. And then Arizona State and Kansas State, I have kind of as the bottom of that tier two. Kansas State, you get a veteran quarterback, but they've got to build beyond just him. Avery Johnson has been a solid player, but there's just not been a lot of success around him. And they haven't really taken that next step. Now, they put a ton of their eggs in that Avery Johnson basket. They don't really have a lot of depth. They don't have a lot of other quarterbacks, let's say, that have played. And so it's either Avery Johnson or nothing. It's not quite that. I mean, obviously, you have to have other players there, but that's kind of how this team feels. If Avery Johnson is hitting and he's got a complementary set of players that can help him out, I think Kansas State could be a force. But there's a lot of ifs there. And I don't know that they have what it takes to take that next level. They have a new head coach as well, so I'm curious to see what happens there. Arizona State, I think they're a really solid program. I just don't know that they're yet back to that level of where they had with Sam Levitt, right? You get Cutter Boley coming in, a recruit from Kentucky. A lot of people are really high on him as a quarterback. Could he be the difference maker? They've got a lot of good wide receivers. They've done really well there, but can they take it to that next level? We'll see. Like I said, I think they're in that tier two. Right now, I'm putting them at the bottom of it, but I still think that they are more than capable of winning the conference or at least competing for a conference title. But we'll see. Tier three, I've got three teams, and that's Baylor, Oklahoma State, and TCU. Baylor, you bring in DJ Lagway, coveted quarterback from Florida who just really kind of burned at Florida. And quite honestly, the Gators had a ton of problems beyond him. There's a ton of pressure put on him as kind of this high level quarterback coming in that was supposed to hit. Coming into the season, he was projected to be, one of the top quarterbacks in the country, and it just fizzled out. There was a ton of interceptions. I mean, he had a game where he had like 5 interceptions. Things didn't go well in Florida all around, hence why there was firings, why things changed. I personally think that DJ Lagway moving to Baylor is a great thing for him. And I think this could be a really good spot for him to kind of flourish in a way that doesn't have the same pressure. Going to Baylor is definitely not going to have that same pressure as staying in Florida. If it works, all the better for him, right? And for Baylor. I think this is an opportunity where he can just kind of hone in and do what he needs to. Now, the biggest issue here for Baylor is their defense. Can they change that? Can Dave Aranda get anything going? Honestly, he's on a hot seat. So I think this is Dave Aranda and DJ Lagway kind of riding out to the sunset together if things go south. If it doesn't work at Baylor for DJ Lagway, they're in real trouble or he's in real trouble. So they're putting a lot of eggs in that basket of DJ Lagway, especially Dave Aranda, who quite honestly was supposed to get fired last year, but they decided to stay. What's that going to look like? Oklahoma State. Many people think that this is probably going to be too low for Oklahoma State. I've seen a lot of people optimistic about them. And the biggest reason why I think people are optimistic about them, there's many, but one of the biggest reasons I think is they're trying to find the next Indiana. You're trying to find the next program that the coach came from the G5 level, came in, brought in a bunch of their players from that team that they had success, and then suddenly build this behemoth in college football. It could happen. Oklahoma State is very capable of doing that. They have a ton of money that just wasn't utilized the last few years under Mike Gundy. It was just kind of the wheels fell off, right? But Oklahoma State, if this works, can be a major force in the Big 12. They have been for years. But I think with the right coaching staff, with the right players, this could be a really, really dangerous team. But I caution anybody that wants to try to find Indiana this year, right? It can happen. Don't get me wrong. There's going to be teams that can have that similar model, but I also think that Indiana is such a rare use case that it's tough for teams to kind of pivot and change their entire structure based off of Indiana. It worked and it is working, but it's not necessarily going to work for everybody else. Now, like I said, this could work for Oklahoma State. They come in, they bring in 53 players from the transfer portal. That is needed, right? Like Oklahoma State just didn't have what they needed to. They went 2 seasons without a win in conference play. It just was a disaster and things weren't going well. So you need to bring in a new set of talent. Now, of those 53, 16 came from North Texas. North Texas was very solid last year and they had a lot of success. But does that naturally make you better at a Power 4 level? I don't know. I think the foundation is there. I would be surprised if Oklahoma State hits immediately this year, but I can see the foundation points of where you could look at this team. And while everybody is looking for the Indiana, I can see that Oklahoma State probably fits that model the most. And I think there's real potential there where they could be like Indiana. But at the same time, Indiana wasn't built overnight. I mean, that's a kind of a cliche, but I think the foundation more than anything is being laid. And I think there's a great opportunity for Oklahoma State. I just don't know if they're there yet. Now, with that said, they bring in a quarterback in Drew Mestamaker, who I love. I think he's a phenomenal quarterback. And I think if they can compete at the Power 4 level and do it at the same that they did at North Texas, Oklahoma State's going to be a really dangerous team this year. I think Drew Mestamaker alone is going to make that a real challenge. Now, once again, he has to step up to that Power 4 level. And this was the biggest knock for Devin Dampier last year coming in from New Mexico is, can he do that at the Power 4 level? Well, yeah, quarterbacks do that all the time. But that's going to be the biggest question for him is, can he have that same success? Can he have that same consistency that he had at North Texas against, honestly, just inferior opponents to, in the Big 12 level? We'll see. I'm optimistic about Oklahoma State. Quite honestly, I think tier 3 may be too low for them, but I also think that's hedging a lot of bets that they win, they were the worst program in the Big 12 and overnight suddenly I don't know that they're going to be at that highest level. I do believe that they can be there, but I don't know that from the jump I'm going to put them there. Now, I may be an outlier here. I think there's a lot of people that are going to be very optimistic about Oklahoma State, but I think there's a lot of change that has to take place. 53 portal players is not nothing, right? You have to bring a lot of players together that have never been together outside of those 16 from North Texas. And that's not a small number by any means. But I think trying to blend everything together with that many players in the first season of a coach is tough, right? You saw that with Rich Rod last year at West Virginia. Granted, he didn't have the same kind of trajectory of bringing in a ton of the same players from the same team. I mean, but at the same time, I think it's not going to be as easy. So there's that. TCU is one of these teams where I just don't know. Quite honestly, I don't know where to put them. They didn't really add a ton through the transfer portal, and most of that is because they already had a sustainable roster. But at the same time, I don't know that that is good enough to get them to that next level. Now I know there's national people out there that are really high on TCU and what they've done. Maybe not to the level of they're going to be a Big 12 title contender, but I know that there's a lot of love for what they can do. And so I'm curious in who TCU is. I don't trust the coaching staff. If I'm just being completely honest, I just don't. And I don't know that they have the right pieces to be able to do it. They lose Josh Hoover to Indiana, who, he was turnover prone, right? Like he turned over the ball a ton, but I don't know that that was their only issue. I think they had other issues beyond that. And so I'm really curious to see who TCU is. I just to me, when you immediately say TCU, I think of them as a middling team this year. Now, they've had tremendous success, and I think that they can be there. They have the formula. They know what it takes to get there. At least the coaching staff does. Sonny Dykes has done it. But I just don't there's something about them that I'm not ready to buy in on yet. Maybe that's just me. Moving on to tier 4. Tier 4, I've got Cincinnati, Kansas, UCF, and West Virginia. Cincinnati, you lose Brendan Sorsby, you lose, some good players. I don't know what's going to happen with Cincinnati. They were a good team last year until the last part of the season, but I don't know that they have the same chemistry and staff that they had in years prior. They bring in a new transfer quarterback in JC French the fourth from Bowling Green. Really solid player, but is he the guy that's going to take them to the next level? I don't know. We'll see. They're another team that I don't know what they're able to do. At the end of the day, I still think they're kind of a middling team that just doesn't have what it takes right now to be in the upper tier. Kansas, you lose your star quarterback that you've had for a very long time. What does life look like after that? And I don't know that they have that necessarily figured out. They struggled with him at times, but they also had some of their highest highs with him in Kansas program history. So, is this a team that was more dependent on him as their quarterback and kind of the rise, or is this kind of the whole collection that was rising and he was just kind of the opportunity there that helped? Jalen Daniels was like he the guy that was kind of the glue that kept them together. What's this going to be? I don't see a clear point where this is a team that is suddenly going to challenge, right? I think there's too many pieces that have to be fixed that it doesn't really fit in my mind of them being a top team. UCF and West Virginia, I'm going to lump in both of this. There's just a lot of turnover, and I think their individual coaches, I think, are really solid, and I think you're seeing something built there where both of these coaches they were there in a previous stint, and both of them have what it takes to win at the highest level. I just don't know if they're there yet. I mean, for example, West Virginia, I think last year had something like 58 players in the portal. I'd have to go back and look. This year they have 34. Now, a lot of that's needed as you see what happened that first year, and then you retool and get what you need to. But once again, I don't know that they've made those next steps to get there. And then they bring in Michael Hawkins as a quarterback from Oklahoma, who he's good, but I don't know that he's elite. And so I don't know that that changes a ton for West Virginia, but Rich Rod is a great coach, and so I think they're gonna be on the rise. I just don't know that they've made enough of an effort to get there. UCF is in a similar situation where they bring in Alonzo Barnett from JMU, really solid quarterback. I think there's some good things there, but once again, I think in totality, the pieces just aren't there yet. Now, I would love to see UCF and West Virginia be good again. I think that would be a great thing for this conference. I just don't know that this year is that year where you look at them and say, "Hey, they're better." Well, I think you can say that they're better. I just don't know that you're going to look at them and say, "Hey, they're going to be competing for a Big 12 title." I could be wrong, but I just don't see that one there yet. Moving on lastly to tier 5, and maybe this doesn't come as a surprise to some people, maybe it will to others. I have Colorado and Iowa State. Colorado, I don't look, I'm a big Deion Sanders fan, and I think there's a lot about what he does that can be good for the game. The problem is there's just literally no consistency in Colorado. They turn over faster than anybody in the country. They don't have a lot of consistency. They're not able to build off of the successes that they have had. And it's just kind of another middling, if not lower tier team in the conference. You have one year where you had Shadir and Travis Hunter that obviously things were great. And even then, you couldn't get to the highest level. And now you don't have those guys. You don't know who your quarterback's going to be. There's a quarterback battle there. You've got, an last year's freshman that was is vying for the job against former Utah quarterback and Isaac Wilson, right? You don't know what you have there, and I don't know that the full pieces or the full complementary piece as a team is really there. You can't go add 43 more players and expect to have another change. Now, some of that you can continue to stack and build and do whatever, but I just don't see this coming together. And there's nothing about what I've read or seen from Colorado over the last few years that gives me hope for them that they're going to challenge for a Big 12 title. I think they could be in the middle of the conference. I think they could mix it up and cause some problems for people, but I don't see Colorado as being a threat. Now, maybe this gets marked and people look at this and suddenly it comes back and I eat my own words. I just don't see Colorado as being a team that is going to compete at the same level. When you've got Texas Tech and you've got Colorado, it's a drastic difference. And I just can't get my mind around that. Plus, the results on the field have to matter, and it hasn't worked, right? It just simply hasn't worked, and I don't know where you go from there. Iowa State, you lose your head coach who's been there forever, big culture guy, gets them to their first 10-win season in program history. He leaves, takes a majority of the roster with him. You're having to retool with 47 portal players, guys that are coming in. Like, it's just a complete turnover of everything. And while Oklahoma State brought in a lot of players that can bring some consistency, there's just not that same level here at Iowa State. It's a lot of mismatch and everything that they're the West Virginia of last year. And I just don't see a world where they have the resources or the ability to be able to instantly take that jump. Whereas Oklahoma State, assuming that they didn't even have those 16 from North Texas, they have resources. Iowa State doesn't. They're in a world of trouble. They're considering cutting programs. Well, they did cut programs. They cut their gymnastics program. Like, this is a situation where not a lot of success or sustainability is in that athletic department, and now you're retooling as an entire program. What do you do? I just don't buy it. I don't see it. There's nothing there. Nothing is a strong word, but I would say it's the complementary pieces aren't there yet, right? They're all coming together. They're all going to try to do their best, but I just don't think they have what it takes. I think they're closer to what West Virginia was last year of trying to just kind of establish a culture, trying to get through it, and trying to build for next year. But I think with Iowa State, this is going to be a multi-year project. The fact that the last year was the first year in program history that they got to 10 wins with a coach that had been there forever just kind of shows what is the hurdle that Iowa State has to face. And now you're doing that without that coach. You're doing that without the resources. You're doing that without the consistency. It's a long slog to get there. So tough, right? That's just the nature of it. So that's, ultimately that's where whoops that's where we're at. I don't know that it's an easy situation for them, but that's where it is. So let's transition here shortly to the defensive side of the ball for Utah, and we're going to break them down in the last minutes that we have here. But first, let me tell you about our partners at Whatnot. Let me get this up here. Sorry, trying to make sure that I've got everything. Sometimes, you're a one-man band and it just doesn't always work. Somebody can produce this for me as I'm doing it. No. All right. So, wow, we just screwed that up. All right. If I can pull things up right here, get my read, we're going. If you love the thrill of the hunt for sports memorabilia, fan gear, or sports equipment, you have to check out Whatnot. It's a live stream shopping platform where you can bid on everything from vintage collectibles to high-end sports equipment in real time. The best part, you aren't just looking at static photos, you're interacting with sellers and seeing the items live before you buy. I've been obsessed lately, some would say addicted, to several golf shows to try to find cool upgrades for my game. If you haven't joined yet, scan the QR code on the screen or use the link below. You'll get a credit toward your first purchase just for using the link. All right, let's go to the defensive side of the ball and let's get sorry, too many screens here. Let's jump in and let's go to defensive tackle. Well, first, before I get to defensive tackle, let me just kind of tell you the overarching things that the Colton Swan, the new defensive coordinator, wants to bring for this defense. He wants offensive coordinators to see smart defenders. And what he means by that is he wants to see guys that are always running to the ball, they're playing hard, they're adaptable to anything that an offense throws. A lot of that really, when it's summed down to it, is effort. And I think sometimes last year you did not see that effort. Now they had a lot of success, right? Overall, in totality, they had a lot of success. But especially when it came to tackling and especially in the run game, there was not, I don't want to say there wasn't effort, but I think as a collective, the team just couldn't figure it out. And there was issues. You can look at the BYU game and in the effort, it just wasn't there, right? And so I think that's what Colton Swan is trying to get at is he's trying to find effort players. He wants guys that can come in, that they're giving their all. It doesn't matter what side of the field you're on, you're going to run to that ball and you're going to do your best to be able to get there. Now, this is a Utah defense that prides itself on being physical. Those things are still going to be there. That's not going to change. It's still going to be a lot of man coverage. There's still going to be a lot of blitzing. There's going to be a lot of pressures. There's going to be a lot of those things of the hallmark Utah defense that you know. But he wants guys that are adaptable, guys that can understand and diagnose what's going on the offensive side of the ball and understand what they're trying to do to you. Now, that's easier said than done. But at the same time, you're trying to get into this adaptability with this team. And that's a big point from Morgan Scalley top down, right? This isn't just defense, this is offense, defense, special teams, everything. Everything needs to be adaptable. And you've got to be able to have great situational awareness where you understand what teams are doing. And so, as I've mentioned before, Utah is going to highlight a lot of the things that they see on a regular basis. They're going to do their best to be able to just have those things down. And as part of that, they understand the whole situational side of it, where when you're facing a team that is traditionally doing this, these are the looks that you're going to get. That's not to say you're always going to get that, but you're going to get these looks. And so you understand things at a higher level. Now, that's not a huge change from what Utah's done on the defensive side of the ball, but at the same time, it's just getting that effort, getting that aggressiveness to the ball, getting the tackles, not just, you're wrapping up and not just getting these shoulder tackles that we see, or just, feigning a tackle, whatever it may be. Like you're actually going through it. You're playing through the defense or the offensive player. You're doing what you can to make an impact in the game. And that's what Colton Swan wants. So with that context, let's move to the defensive tackle room. These are the guys that I have listed as the potential starters and their backups, right? And so looking at this, the defensive tackle room is going to be one that is really fascinating for Utah, and one where if they can find success here, I think their defense is going to be fine. Their back seven is going to be solid. It's more what's happening up on the front four. Now, that's not to say that there's worry here, but it's really coming down to, you saw at the end of the season last year where the effort and the ability in that front four, just it wasn't there. Now, with that said, your edges were great, right? John Henry Daly was a phenomenal asset for Utah, and he provided a ton of pressure and problems for teams. When he went down with his injury, suddenly you saw things that changed. Utah didn't have that explosive threat where teams knew that they had to defend him. Defend being on the offense, you get what I'm saying. But when he went down, things changed. Now, you don't have John Henry Daly coming back on the edge, and we'll get to them in a second. But you've got to find those guys that they have to mix it up in the middle, that you've got to be aggressive. You've got to be physical. That's the biggest thing for what Utah's trying to do, is being more physical, stopping the runs, trying to wrap up, tackle better. That puts more or less pressure on your linebackers, who don't feel like they have to be everything for this team. If those defensive tackles can get it done, they're going to be okay. Now, the starters that I see here, and from the conversations that we have, it's kind of a three-way race right now, and that's Pupu Sepulona, Carson Kafusi, and Jai Moy. These three are really solid. And what was said about them from Luther Ellis was that Pupu Sepulona leads more by example. He's getting it done by just doing it. Carson Kafusi has taken a significant leadership role and he's being vocal. He's demanding a lot of attention from these guys. He's got the part. He looks the part. I mean, he's a physical specimen, but he has to take it to that next level as well, where he's not just playing the game, he's now playing confident and he's playing aggressive. That's kind of the next step for him. And then there's Jai. Jai is an undersized defensive tackle who plays above himself. He was, quote, a pretty special player, and the things he does is, quote, pretty exceptional. This is a time and time conversation that we've had with many different people. Offensive players say that he is one of the toughest players to try to go against. His coach says that he's one of the toughest players to go against. He's explosive, he's quick, he's got a great feel for the game. He's one of the hardest guys to block. This is a guy that can mix it up and do what he needs to. And that's what you need at Utah. This is the type of player that Utah's been missing, where you need a guy that just understands the game and he's going to get wherever he needs to and do his job. Now, will he be part of the first unit? I don't know. But I think with the conversations that were had and kind of the chip on his shoulder, talking to him, he understands it. As an undersized guy, he understands that he doesn't fit the prototypical model of what a defensive tackle should be. And that hasn't stopped him one bit. If anything, it's got him at a higher motor where he's just in there, just mixing it up and just absolutely wrecking people. But I think from that, those three are going to be the guys where you're going to see probably the most. I think those three have the highest probability of being your starters. Pupu and Carson obviously have had experience being able to play at Utah specifically. Jai, he comes from San Jose State where he was great there, but now mixing it into Utah's defense, what does that be? What does that bring? Excuse me. But I think those three are going to be really solid. Behind him, or those three, excuse me, is Jamal Wallace, Lucas Samsula, and Dylan Battle. Now, Jamal Wallace and Lucas Samsula have a real potential to be starter caliber players. There's just a few things that they kind of need to fix in their game. Jamal Wallace, he's quick and he can run, but he's still not to that level of confidence. He's a transfer player, so it's kind of tough to be able to fully acclimate, but it's really kind of doing it without thinking. And then there's Lucas Samsula, who he's a physical, strong presence, played at Wyoming, did really well, but he needs to work on his pad level techniques. And so it's really just kind of making sure that you're fine tuning that stuff. And right now, those other guys are ahead of him. Switching to defensive end. Starters here, it's another three-way race, in my opinion. And I think it ultimately would have been a two-man race if not for Ethan Day. Lance Holtzclaw is going to mix up on one side, Cash Dillon likely on the other, and then Ethan Day is kind of that third figure who is making a ton of noise. And I think it's mostly between Ethan Day and Cash Dillon, quite honestly. That's where it's kind of coming in. Lance has taken a tremendous step forward. He's a vocal leader. He's mixing it up. He's doing what he needs to. He's physical. He's getting to the backfield. He's doing what he needs to take that next level. Now, at this point last year, Utah had a lot of players that were really solid, but not many expected John Henry Daly to be who he was this last season. There was that high ceiling for him if he could do it, but there wasn't yet trust in the sense that they hadn't seen it at a consistent level. When the bright lights came on, John Henry Daly absolutely delivered and did exactly what they needed to for all the pressures that they needed to, for the disruption that they needed to. That's what you're trying to look for. Right now, they have a good picture of the guys that they can do it. Lance Holtzclaw, Cash Dillon, Ethan Day. You just don't know how that's going to fill out, right? With that said, I think Ethan Day is taking a massive step forward. He's a guy that has also been another vocal leader. He's bringing physicality. He also has experience, right? And his coach said that his biggest experience factor here is his physical point of attack and his power rush, which is exactly what Utah needs. We saw him in a lot of these spring situations where he was always in the backfield. He was the biggest disruptor, especially late in the part of that spring camp where he just absolutely wrecked people. So I think you're going to see a lot of success from him. I think you're going to have a guy that's really going to make his name known. But we'll see how it all kind of factors out. Either way, you've got three edge rushers that are going to be really solid, and I think Utah's going to be in a good spot there. Backups here, Paul Fitzgerald, experienced guy for Utah, but suffered an injury. not really sure what he's going to be, wasn't able to participate in spring. What does he provide? Obviously, a really solid player, played as a freshman at Utah State, was really solid there, has just been kind of behind too many players here at Utah and then got injured. So we'll see what his rehab looks like and what he can do. And then behind that is just a little bit more inexperienced players or players that are needing to develop before they can get in more consistency. And that's Nicholas Igwa, PJ Taki, and Alex Cloward. Solid backups, but I don't know that there is a bigger drop off between them to what's at the top. And so you need those guys at the top to hit. But I think Utah has enough depth there to do what they need to, and I think be really solid. So, good opportunity for Utah there. Let me go back to that. So, with the defense, defensive front in particular, I think this is where the defense is really going to be determined, right? I think if they can get some solid play here, I think this defense is going to be fine. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing. Everything behind them, I think, is pretty solid and experienced and has the talent to do what they need to. But I think if you can hit on that front four, I think Utah's going to be in a great situation. So moving on to linebacker, there's two names that have emerged immediately, and that's Cyrus Polu and Jonathan Hall. Jonathan Hall obviously has been a starter for Utah. He needs to take a step forward. That's clear. There are some tackling issues or coverage issues that he needed to improve on. But quite honestly, some of the tape when you watch it was not on him. Now, don't get me wrong, there is stuff that is on him. Every player is going to have that. But a lot of the problems that he dealt with largely were because of what was happening in front of him. The guys weren't getting it done. And so he was put in situations that didn't really help him. And so he was out of position or whatever needs you because of the players ahead of him. I'm really fascinated to kind of see him take that next step forward. You're seeing him become much more confident in his position and being able to get to where he needs to. And really just having another year will help him. But even with that, even with the experience and the opportunities there, the biggest name that was talked about and we saw through all of spring camp was Cyrus Polu, a rangy linebacker who honestly can fit in anywhere. He's physical, he's quick, he can do what he needs to wherever you line him up. And that really helps this Utah team where if you need to blitz him, you can get him in there. If you need him to stay back in coverage, if you can mix it up with, a tight end or whatever it may have you, he's a guy that can kind of do it all. And I think you're going to hear his name a ton. Now, taking it from spring and moving it into fall is the next big step for him, right? He doesn't have a ton of experience yet. He's still coming in there, but at the same time, this is a guy that has absolutely taken the next step forward and is consistently hitting at a high level. If he can do that in fall, this becomes a really great opportunity for Utah to have that middle of the field really cemented. You've got smart players there, guys that can hit hard, they can tackle, they can play great in coverage. That becomes a great situation for Utah as kind of the quarterbacks of the field where they can kind of coordinate everything and do what they need to. You do need to see some improvement from Jonathan Hall. You do need to see that experience play out with Cyrus Polu as he gets more comfortable with it. But if these two hit, that's a really solid unit in just your starters. Now, behind that, you have Trey Reynolds, who has had a lot of play at Utah and is a great backup. He can mix it up in there as a starter as well, but I think he's going to be tabbed more as a second unit guy. Brock Fano Imana, another guy that he's developing as he's come into the program. Was a return missionary, so it's taken him a time to get in, but I think you're seeing some of it pieced together, and you've got a lot of ability in that depth. Behind that, you've got other guys that are just kind of acclimating and getting used to the system, whether that be true freshmen or guys coming in from community college or guys that are just developing through the program in Taysom Reed, Elijah Ellis, Preston Pitts, and LeGarry Mitchell. Those last two are true freshmen. And so it's going to be a little bit of a drinking through a fire hose for them. But you've got good depth, and you've got guys that can do a lot for you. It's just more your top end guys are clearly there for you. Trey Reynolds becomes a great asset as your third guy, the first guy off the bench, so to speak. That's going to help. So I think Utah's really solid in this linebacker spot. I don't think there's going to be much worry there, but at the same time, they've got to be able to be aggressive. They've got to be vocal. They're kind of the glue for a defense when the communication comes in there. Obviously, most of the linebackers are usually the guy that has the green dot, the communication with the defensive staff. Utah tends to operate in a different situation where they're trying to see what the offense is going to do and then they relay their signals in late. So sometimes that green dot doesn't really matter because you're looking for hand signals. But at the same time, these guys, Cyrus Polu and Jonathan Hall, they have to be on point with their communication. That's where this team needs to move forward. Then let's go to corner. Now, corner is a really interesting position group this year because there's a lot more size on this team. They've got a lot of guys that are taller. You've got a lot of physicality that is being played, and I think they brought that physicality in spring. There were so many times, especially late, where there was so much physicality that Sharif Shah had to kind of dial it back. He said one of the biggest negatives, if it's considered a negative, was that they were too handsy. They were mixing it up too much in a way that wasn't that was gonna draw flags, right? Like, you've gotta be handsy as a DB to be able to get in there, mix it up with that wide receiver, keep them from catching that ball, but you've gotta do it in a way where it's more inside, where it's not outside, you're not grabbing the outside of their jerseys. You're doing it in a way where you can gain that leverage to be able to manipulate, do whatever you need to be able to make it tougher on that wide receiver. So it's now it's not a matter of physicality needing to ramp up, it's more dialing it back. And so I think you're going to see this Utah team try to be very physical in their corners. Now, that could burn them. There could be a lot of pass interferences, but I think you've got a group that understands what it takes to be physical and what they need to do. So really, really fascinated there. But I think you have some really solid players there. Scooby Davis, he's going to come back as one of your starters. He's gaining experience, but he's doing it very much so coming back as a veteran with a humble attitude of he understands that he's not where he needs to be. And Sharif Shah talked about him being a guy that is hungry to learn. And so if you can take some improvements from that and be able to move forward, I think you've got another solid player that's going to continue to lead that room. Beyond that, let me say this with corners, there's a lot more rotation here. So I'm listing starters, but there's a lot more rotation here. But I think these three guys are kind of the more consistent ones. So Scooby Davis, as I mentioned, and then you've got two transfers in Elijah Reed and James Chenault. Both of these guys played phenomenal in spring. Like I said, spring, you can't fully take that as the gospel truth, but really solid assets for Utah and what they're able to do. Um, Shaw said Elijah Reed has a level of physicality that is separating him. That's giving him a lot of opportunities there. And James Chenault, he says his play has been incredible. He played it or no, excuse me. He stays connected with his receivers, and he has a lot of experience that is translating at Utah. So, you've got a lot of guys there that are going to mix it up. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to try to do everything they can to be able to make that wide receiver miss. It's just more dialing it back a little bit so that they don't get called for penalties. As backups, Earl Parker, they love what he can do, just kind of developing and being more consistent. JC Hart, similar guy. And then you got younger players in Dylan Waters and Major Hinchin who are developing. So really solid unit. It's just kind of piecing it all together and getting what needs to be done. Then there's nickel. This one's pretty simple. Rock Caldwell is your guy. He's the guy that's going to get in there and just mix it up. You can put him outside as well, so he could be at corner if they needed to, but he fits this nickel role very well. He's aggressive. He's instinctual. He understands what he needs to do and very smart player. But he's physical enough that he can play and meet the demands of what a nickel does. So, I think he's the guy that's there. Nicholas Brown is your backup. A more slender framed kid that is developing. I don't know that he's quite to the level yet where they fully trust him out on the field at a highly enough level. Like Rock Caldwell is your guy, but he's not afraid to get in there and mix it up. He's just a little bit more slender, needs to put some more mass on to be able to do what he needs to in that position. But a good player, rangy, is able to do what he needs to. As a backup, you can always throw Jackson Benny in there. He's played that position. He understands it. They're going to move him more at safety and keep him kind of there. But, I wouldn't be surprised if you see Jackson in that nickel role as well. He can kind of be that hybrid player of playing safety, nickel, whatever have you. And I think there's a lot of opportunities there for him. So lastly, let's move to safety. You got two guys that have kind of emerged as your starters, and that's Jackson Benny and Rabbit Evans. Pro Football Focus recently published something that says that Jackson Benny would be one of the top corners, moving forward for the NFL draft, a first round guy. There's a lot of love for what he's able to do. And I think you're seeing that develop and his confidence keep moving forward, right? Last year was really his first time playing consistently. And now he's got the confidence to know that he can do it at a high level. He understands that there's a ton that he needs to improve on. And that's where it's taking it to that next level this year for him, and I think you're gonna see that, and I think you've seen that in spring. He's been a mainstay as a starter at safety. Now, with that said, Derek Odom, their position coach, he's trying to mix and match. So one time it could be Jackson Benny and then Nate Ritchie, and then it's Rabbit Evans and Nate Tillman, and then mixing all these up to try to make sure that they understand how to play with each other. But I think by and large, those are, Jackson Benny and then Rabbit Evans is going to be your other safety that are going to be your starters. Now, Rabbit Evans, he's coming off of an injury, so it's really more just getting back into that conditioning. He was there for spring, so it wasn't that he wasn't able to do it. It's more just being able to be conditioned and do what you need to be able to help that. But they feel really excited about what Scooby, or not Scooby, excuse me, Rabbit can do. He's extremely physical. They like what he's able to do and are excited for that. As the backups, you've got Nate Ritchie, experienced player who, is obviously going to provide a lot of consistency for you for the most part. He still has some improvements that he needs to make coming off of injuries that he's had. But an experienced guy that helps you. You get Nate Tillman, who was thrown into it a bit last year, but is really starting to understand what he needs to, and he's honestly starting to feel confident, and that's a big thing for Utah. Beyond that, you've got Manny Fuller, Marcus Wemberly, a transfer, and then Davis Andrews, who's coming off his mission. They believe highly in what Davis Andrews can do. It's just more kind of acclimating and getting back into that system. So where he fits in particular remains to be seen. But I think this is a really solid unit that is going to help Utah as they move forward and help. So that's your defense. That's your position breakdown. I think you've got a lot really settled on the defensive side of the ball. There's some three-man races, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of belief in what this defense can do. It'll really come down to what that defensive front can do to be able to help this team. But all in all, I think you have a unit that is going to be really solid. So, with that, we're going to sign off today. We're gonna move forward with the offensive side of the ball next week and kind of do a position breakdown there as we move forward. But with that, we will sign off today, and I hope you have a great day.